This is your host, Casey DeShock. Alaska Conversations is supported by a community of Alaskans dedicated to our state. If you'd like to view more information about the show, you can find us at alaskaconversations.com. There you'll be able to find this podcast as well as our show archive. The website is another place to find information and data concerning the topics we discuss, events, upcoming guests, and more about Alaska Conversations. If you have a question, comment, topic recommendation, or a suggested guest, you can email contact@alaskaconversations.com. This is episode 9, and my guest today is Bobby Wilken, the president and head brewer at Hoodoo Brewing Company in Fairbanks, Alaska. Bobby has over a decade of experience in the Alaska brewing scene. Bobby, welcome to Alaska Conversations.
Hi, Casey. Thanks for having me.
All right, so you're up in Fairbanks, Hoodoo Brewing Company, and you guys just primarily focus on brewing, or you're a brew restaurant? What sort of operation do you have going there?
Yeah, we're just primarily brewing. So we just make beer, and we initially, for the first couple of years, we just had beer on site. People could bring food if they wanted to. We still allow people to bring food, but now we have a rotating food truck schedule. So every day, different food trucks parked out in our beer garden. We have really great outdoor space, and we built a spot for our food truck to pull right up and serve right into the beer garden. So that's kind of what we do now. But our business is mainly just making beer and selling it on site at the brewery, and then we do a little bit of distribution, mainly around Fairbanks.
Well, you grab wheat or barley, throw some yeast, some sugar, water. What's so difficult about brewing beer? What are the complexities of brewing a good batch of beer?
Yeah, really, it's kind of a combination of brewing beer is kind of an engineering conundrum. You know, we really make beer just like I started off home brewing, and we really make beer exactly like that. You do the exact same process, but you just do it in such a scale that it's really just trying to move hundreds of thousands of pounds of grain around, and moving thousands of gallons of liquid around, and then trying to do that in a completely clean and sanitary manner that can easily be cleaned, and then trying to make sure that it's of a high quality where people will actually want to buy it and support your hobby turned career. So the big challenge is just trying to keep quality up, keep microbiological contamination at bay, and then keep the machines working with the pumps and the forklifts and things like that help you actually make it happen. It's engineering and science.
I have done some home brews myself. I've been to plenty of events where everybody brings their home brew, and a lot of times it ends up being everybody says, yeah, that's a really great one, but really it's pretty poor quality when you're just a home brewer, and so you move into the commercial aspect of it. You need to have a little bit of experience, some trial and error time. Would you recommend anybody just jump right in, start a microbrew tomorrow?
No, you definitely need some luck, but most of all, you definitely need some education, and that can come from schooling. There's brewing schools. I went to a brewing school, and then there's really the most important thing is actually working at a functioning brewery. Is where I think I got the most out of, just seeing kind of day to day how people actually make beer on a commercial scale, and there's so many variables in brewing and just in the industry in general that I wouldn't recommend somebody look at it and go, "Oh, that looks neat. I think I'll try that real quick and try to start a brewery tomorrow." But it's just something to kind of a craft to master. That's very possible. But it's homebrewer beer kind of gets a bad rap because there's great homebrewed beer out there that's commercial quality for sure. But a lot of it is homebrewers don't really have the kind of information and that experience of just kind of some key factors of having healthy yeast is a big part of it, and that a lot of times doesn't come through with home brewers. It just doesn't work out that way. So then the little faults in beer can make the beer kind of just taste homebrewy, as they say. So
Now you worked at a brewery. When I was reading through it, you worked down in Juneau, I believe. Maybe I'm off on that
Yeah,
one, but
no, you're right. I worked at Alaskan Brewing. I was a brewer for about 3 years. Um, Before that, I was home brewing and really wanted to get into the industry. I went to the Siebel Institute in Chicago and got basically a brewing degree there, and they have a combination program with a school in Germany in Munich. So I did this 4 month kind of crash course in brewing, and then that's how I kind of made my way into Alaskan brewing. I more or less sent them my resume. I had no experience on it, and just that I was an avid home brewer, and I went and took this, got this diploma from the Siebel Institute, and I just said I really, really want that job, and I just kind of kept calling them and pestering them, and then it took about 8 months, and finally there was an opening, and I went down to Juneau and kind of slid in there. But so I was at Alaskan 3 years as a brewer, and then the last 2 years I was there. I was in the lab, quality control lab, just doing all sorts of statistical kind of quality control on the beer batches and testing new beers, brewing new beers for future release, doing tastings every morning. So I was there for about 5 years total, and then my wife and I decided to quit our jobs and try and start a brewery.
well
We opened in 2012, Halloween 2012.
the lab sounds like a dream job. Wake up every morning, drink some beer, make sure that everything's going well. But if you go onto your website, hoodoobrew.com, you can start looking around through there, and somebody will find you actually have like the original plans drawn out on a piece of computer paper, it looks like, and that's where Hoodoo Brew got its beginnings.
Right.
So you guys just take this, you decide, okay, Juneau's not it, you're from Fairbanks, and you decided to head up to Fairbanks to get this thing started.
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Fairbanks, and my wife is too, and I got a big family up here that I enjoy their company, and she does too. So we love Fairbanks, and and there just wasn't, in combination with that, there just wasn't a representative brewery in Fairbanks. Silver Gulch is here, just north of town, out in Fox. And they're a brewery restaurant, but I just felt that there just really needed to be kind of a Fairbanks brewery in town, and just a place to go have a glass of beer or two, and then and just kind of represent. So there was also the opportunity we thought was just kind of wide open. So so we kind of threw caution to the wind and decided to build the brewery that we've been dreaming about for 10 years, and kind of seems like we pulled it off so far.
And so now you've also got a story about growlers on the website. Some people may think growlers are more of a, now that we have a lot of craft breweries, growlers have become more popular, but actually that's where the beer industry kind of started when bottling beer wasn't as profitable as it is today.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, people started doing growlers as a way to go grab beer straight from the brewery when there really wasn't a way to get beer in bottles on a very small scale. And now there is, but there wasn't companies making small bottling machines. Bottling was for the big boys and the big breweries putting out thousands of cases a day. But if you wanted to bottle in small amounts, you really were out of luck. So breweries started doing the growlers, kind of catching on in the 90s, and now today we see more and more canning. Now there's small canning lines of any size. We have I think it's really the smallest possible canning line in the world. It's maybe 6 feet wide. It's rolling 6 foot wide by about 3 feet deep machine that we roll out, and we can beer every maybe 2 or 3 weeks. We do a little canning run. It's all super manual, but it's a great way to get beer out the door. And another option to the growler, maybe if you're going camping or you just want to throw a couple beers in your backpack or whatever, cans are a great option for that. So now breweries, you can get growlers. A lot of times you can get bottles that are just bottles on a small scale, and then same with cans. Now canning is out there, and there's also crowlers. We don't do crowlers currently, but those are kind of a combination can growler is where the name comes from, and those are generally just filled right out of the taps, and then there's a seamer that will seam the lid on, and it's kind of just like this big can, a one-way, disposable, recyclable can that is real easy for small breweries to do. So you see those popping up quite a bit nowadays.
So you've got a small canning operation. Do you have a bottling operation there, or just cans?
We do have a bottling machine. We've done we do maybe 1 or 2 bottling runs a year of just a particular kind of special project. So currently we've done a few barrel aged barley wines. So barley wines aged in whiskey or bourbon barrels. As of late, we do 2 beers released on each of the solstices. So, solstice is a real big deal in Alaska, and even more so up here in Fairbanks, where the shortest day of the year, December 21st, we get 3 hours and 41 minutes is the length of the day up here from sunrise to sunset. So we have a beer that we've made for the past 2 years called 341. That's a imperial stout that we release on winter solstice on December 21st to kind of celebrate. This is the dark time, and the sun is going to start coming back. And then we do a beer kind of towards the opposite day. For June 21st, the longest day of the year. It's our length of the day up here is 21 hours and 49 minutes from sunrise to sunset. So we make a beer called 2149, and it's a strong Belgian triple, about 12% alcohol, and we release that on summer solstice at the peak of June in Alaska. So we have a small bottling line, an Italian bottle filler that we store away, and then we just pull it out for these special projects.
And people can enjoy it during the Fairbanks. Has got the midnight softball game, softball tournament, all those things going on. So there's a lot of stuff up there for the solstice. When you're talking about the sun, Hoodoo is not you're brewing, but you're also venturing a little bit into harnessing some of your solar power and whatnot up there.
Yeah, we've installed solar panels. I think we're coming on about 3 years ago. And we just got them up on the roof just to kind of offset our power usage. Power up here is expensive, as it is in a lot of places in Alaska. We get abundant sunshine for about half the year, lots of blue skies up here. So we decided to just pop them in there. And breweries are, energy intensive businesses. We have a lot of heating for brewing the beer, but we also have a lot of cooling for cooling the tanks and cooling our cold room. So we have a large chilling system, electric chilling system, that is our main power bill. So we installed about 80 solar panels, and those, for about half the year they just kind of sit there and do nothing, and then about the other half of the year they're running our meter backwards, and we save about maybe a third of our power, about maybe $500 a month we save for about half the year. So it'll pay off, and they say about 8 to 10 years, something like that. But we're a few years in, so we're looking forward to that day. But other than that, they just sit up there and slowly pay themselves back. So it's a good thing kind of for the environment. And so there's always that part, of course.
You've got the solar panels, but you've also Hoodoo's involved in. You have a half marathon, and another thing I thought was really neat that people can find. HoodooBrew.com is you've got a Girl Scout cookies pairing menu for your beers.
Yeah, we did that. We try and do all sorts of things. You always want to come up with new things and fun things, and just you don't want to get bored at all, and you want to come up with fun things for customers to do and ways to expand your craft and your mind. So yeah, we did some Girl Scout cookie pairing, and we do our Hoodoo half marathon. I think we just did our 4th year of that So that's in mid-October generally, and the route has changed a couple times. It basically runs kind of around Fairbanks. Half marathon ends at the brewery. We have a big party, and last year we had close to 600 runners. So it's been growing every year, and it's kind of the last big run of the season. We've kind of scored on weather the past few years. It's just been chilly, but not wintry. In Fairbanks it can be winter in October, but we've had these kind of late falls, which has been very welcome. So it's a nice way to kind of cap off the running season. We have a lot of runners as clientele. We have a weekly beer run on Thursdays where a big group meets, rain or shine, or no matter the temperature. If it's 40 below, they still meet at the brewery. They go for a couple-mile run every Thursday, and then come back and have a beer, celebrate. When it's 40 below, there's maybe 10 runners, and then when it's 80 above in the summer, there could be upwards of 100 people meet there and go for a run and have a beer. But we're always trying to do fun things in our community and just create kind of the scene and have fun in our jobs, and to do these fun events that we have the opportunity of doing.
When you're looking at brewing now, you went from the design phase, the dream phase, you go from Juneau back home to Fairbanks. When you're looking at getting into brewing and you're not pairing food, what sort of what's the process for licensing it, from the day that you dream it up to the day that you start serving beer? What are all of those steps? Are they pretty complicated or pretty straightforward and easy to get through?
Yeah, licensing is definitely a pretty tough one for breweries. Anybody that's making alcohol, it's a highly regulated industry. So there's all sorts of red tape to get through, but it's just one of those things. You just got to slog through it, and it's confusing and complex. We're regulated by the federal government, the state government, and the city government. Here we're in the city of Fairbanks. So we get our kind of the first step is to get your brewer's notice from the federal government that allows you to make beer. So that's as you can imagine, a monstrous binder of background checks, diagrams, what your intention is, what your equipment is, and then how you plan to track that product, that alcohol, to make sure that they get paid their tax money. We pay $7 a barrel of beer goes to the federal government. That's the nationwide excise tax on beer, and so they want to make sure that you're tracking it properly and that they're getting their tax payments appropriately. So you need to prove that you have a good system of saying, this keg is tax paid. We've already paid for that, and this one we haven't yet, but we will. And you have to bond your premises to make sure that they're going to get their money, and they're very good at making sure they get their tax money. So it's that's a big one, is getting licensed to the federal government. The state government is pretty easy. I know it's talking to brewers that have opened up recently. It's gotten a little more difficult, I think, since we opened. It's kind of learning about the licensing in Alaska. Every state has different alcohol licenses, different alcohol laws in general. So learning the alcohol laws of your state, which is Title IV here in Alaska, and learning what sort of a license is appropriate for your business. So we have a brewery liquor license. Alaska has about 9 different types of liquor licenses. So a brewery liquor license allows you to make beer, as much beer as you want. You can make 1 million barrels if you want. You can sell that to anybody else with any sort of liquor license in Alaska. So you can sell it directly to bars and restaurants. Then it doesn't allow you to. It does allow you to sell retail. So in a tap room setting, like we have, and like there's quite a few around the state and around the country now. It's kind of the tap room setting where you go into the brewery and you can have a glass of beer. So in Alaska, you're allowed to go into a brewery and have a pint of beer or two. You're limited. There's a lot of limitations. You're limited to 36 ounces per person per day. You can take 5 gallons, up to 5 gallons per person per day to go. So you can take a keg to go, or you can take 10 4-packs or 10 growlers. That's 5 gallons, but no more. We have to close at 8 o'clock. We have to stop serving alcohol at 8 o'clock.
Is the 8 o'clock 8 o'clock by the city, or is that state? Do you know?
That's statewide for breweries. Yeah. And on that, and this only applies to breweries that don't have a brew pub license, which is a different license, and you would have a dispensary license, another license on top of that. So kind of a good way to think of it is like Glacier Brew House in Anchorage is a brew pub, so they can have whiskey and they can have vodka and they can have wine, and they can stay open late and they can serve you as much as you want, as long as you're not getting too drunk. And so that's kind of, there is a delineation between the brew pub and the brewery. So yeah, 8 o'clock, we can't have any TVs. We can't have any gaming, no pool, no darts, things like that. No live entertainment, which is generally thought of just to mean live music, somebody, a band or anything like that. And no, there's some gray area laws that we're trying to clarify right now, because it's also, you aren't allowed to have any other recreational opportunities, which nobody really knows what that means. So
can you set up shuffleboard bags? Shuffleboard bags?
Yeah, you can't have any sort of no gaming like that. No, nothing to, the way to think of it is that they don't want you to become a bar. So no gaming, no pool, no shuffleboard, no cornhole, things like that. Nothing that's going to cause people to linger. Is kind of the idea. And we used to do yoga every Saturday morning. We had a yoga instructor come in, and they would do a morning yoga session in the tap room, and then people would have a little beer afterwards. But that was seen as a recreational opportunity, so we had to stop doing that. We've done, we do a lot of fundraising for nonprofits and things like that, but some of those have also been kind of seen as recreational opportunities. So we do less of that now, unfortunately, just because the state laws it's just a big gray area that unfortunately we don't want to get in trouble. We want to abide by the law completely. So hopefully that'll all get cleared up. It's kind of in the process of being cleared up. Title IV is in the legislature right now, a rewrite that's I've been trying to get through the state for the past, I would say about 6 years now. And so that will hopefully clarify some of those laws. When
they're talking about these can't have a recreational opportunity, so you lose out on yoga and beer. Is part of the reason of that is because the licensing for a bar is substantially more expensive than the licensing for a brewery, or is there something else at foot there?
Yeah, I mean, in broad strokes, yeah, I would say that is why. There's a limited number of all licenses in Alaska, population based. So a beverage dispensary license is kind of a full liquor license, a bar license. So that allows you to serve all you want, be open late. Kind of the wide open liquor license. And so those are population based. So there's a certain number per capita are allowed in each population area. So once those are all taken up, which in any city in Alaska, they're all taken up. Somebody has every license. Then they're on they're transferable. So then they're on the open market. If I have one that I don't want anymore, I can sell it to basically the highest bidder. And in Fairbanks, those can go from let's say $50,000 to $100,000, and in Anchorage, there's always numbers being thrown around, but a couple $100,000 they're worth. So they're very, very valuable, but that value isn't from the state. That's really because the law says that they're transferable. Once they're essentially sold out from the state, they can rise in value, which they have. So those dispensary license holders they want to protect that as much as they can. Whereas, I'm in the viewpoint of that it's not really the state's job to ensure the value of your investment. So if you decided to invest in a dispensary license, and you take on all the risk of that investment, like me buying beer tanks and things like that, the state doesn't need to guarantee that your investment is going to pay off at some point or it's not going to lose value. You're taking on the risk if the market changes and let's say breweries come in with their tap rooms and they become popular as they have. If the dispensary license holders view that as basically competition, that's business and that's competition, and it should be kind of allowed to go where it goes. And the state shouldn't have to step in and try and stomp down the breweries that are with their successful businesses. But anyways, that's kind of the whole licensing in Alaska is just this great topic you go on about forever.
Yeah, you can, because when I view craft breweries very much like I view Uber to taxis, etc. The consumers changed a little bit. There's not as many people, or maybe there's just maybe there's the same amount, but more people from the fringes are looking for an experience that isn't 300 people stuffed into a bar doing X. And so I think that the consumer would be much more interested. There's a big market for things like the yoga and beer that you were talking about. And I'm not, I know that you received the pushback there, and there's all sorts of forces at hand there. Most of that is not to protect society at large. The vast majority of that is to protect the interest of whoever has purchased the license. And that happens in many, many industries. I know that they continue. There's been a big fight about some of the food and hours, etc., for the breweries. Is there any other thing that, as far as recreation, that you found so far that was really surprised you?
Not a whole lot. There's a couple incidences of people bringing in they bring in a cribbage board, or they bring in some cards to just have some beer and play cribbage with their friends, or bring in a board game or something, and then that basically be somebody reporting that to the state enforcement of, hey, there's gaming going on in this brewery. Kind of a little kind of tattletale scenario, and it's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, obviously the brewery is abiding by the rules and not saying, hey, come on in, we're doing a cribbage tournament. Right. It's just somebody happened to bring in a cribbage board and go sit in the corner. And that's one of the things that's hopefully going to be clarified in the Title IV rewrite, is that if people bring in board games, they're just doing their thing. That's obviously totally fine. Yeah, it'll be, hopefully things do get clarified and we can all just relax and have a beer.
Yeah, and so somebody's going to the board. Then do you get a phone call or an email or something that says, hey, here's a complaint that was filed against you, or is there a formal process for that?
Yeah, there's a formal process. Hopefully they'll give you some sort of a warning. They'll say, hey, we just got this report. We got a report that someone complained about the yoga and said that could be a recreational opportunity. They kind of just let us know. They gave us a little warning. So we said, okay, yeah, we'll cancel it. We don't want to get the next step, which is a notice of violation, NOV. So then that would essentially go before the Alcohol Beverage Control Board, and they would look at the severity of it. Was it accidental, or was it, are you maliciously? Do they need to take further action? Do they need to suspend your liquor license? Do they need to pull your liquor license? So you don't want an NOV. It's a little strike on your record, I guess. So you don't want to upset the board that controls the licensing. So usually they give you a warning, but there are cases where sometimes they'll just issue you that we haven't been issued an NOV, but there are cases where people have just got it in the mail that they got a violation, and they need to appear before the board at their next meeting, which is which is unfortunate, because I think the vast majority of the brewers who just want to, or just really any business person, they want to do what's right and abide by the law, because you don't want to go through any sort of process you don't have to, because you're just busy doing so many other things, just trying to keep the business going and keep your employees happy and keep your customers happy, and you just don't want to have to deal with anything, any sort of other time suck and anything that's going to risk your business.
Well, and I don't want you to self-incriminate yourself any more than you have to with the licensing. I know that you're constantly having to watch out for this. I mean, one of the concerns, if you got cribbage and yoga and craft beer, I mean, you're just one flannel shop away from attracting every hipster in the interior, and you don't want to corner the market, But
no, it's true. It's true.
Now, to the beer itself, I don't. I'm not a beer expert whatsoever. If you're talking a lager versus an IPA, and I don't know if it's just because they're popular right now, but everybody loves to drink IPAs. What's the difference between an IPA and some other type of beer?
Yeah, I mean, the two main categories of beer are ale and lager. So, and it's really the species of yeast that's used to make those two. And then underneath those, main headers, then there's all sorts of different strains of yeast that will that produce different flavors. But so between ale and lager, ale is any beer fermented with an ale yeast, which is fermented, you could say around room temperature. So it's fermented, somewhere between 60 and let's say 85 degrees is where that yeast likes to ferment sugar into alcohol. And a lager is cool fermented. So those yeasts really like to ferment, let's say somewhere between about 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And ale yeast can ferment kind of the simplest of sugars, the three simple sugars. But lager yeast can ferment one more type of sugar. The cell wall is able to bring in this fourth type of sugar, and that happens. It can happen at cool temperatures and over long periods of time. So ales generally take between, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks to make. Lagers, you can just double that or maybe more. So lagers do well with aging. Lager means to age, the German term. So when you lager a beer, you just kind of let it sit there in the cold tank and let it age and let that yeast. The yeast will just continue to slowly kind of nibble away at some sugars and really dry the beer out. So that's why lagers can be very crisp and clean beers, where ales usually have they're not quite as crisp in general, and they're more of a kind of fruity, have a little fruity notes. Usually lagers don't have any fruitiness to them. They're very crisp, clean, and you get a real fresh grain flavor, where ale yeast kind of have fruity esters that come from the yeast. So in that ale style, that's where you have a lot of the beer styles you hear of, stout, IPA, porter, obviously pale ale. Most beer styles fall into that ale category, where under lager, there's a lot of beers that are just called lager, or there's, Pilsner, there's Bock beers, those are lagers. All sorts of different beers under that lager style. Most beers in the craft beer scene are ales, mainly because you have a lot more flexibility, a lot of different yeast strains producing a lot of different flavors. They're from a startup brewery standpoint, they're quicker to make. So you basically wouldn't have to, you could buy half the tank space. You can turn over the tanks faster if you're producing all ales. There's very few all lager microbreweries, just because of the cost of the equipment. You need double the tank space or double the storage space for the beer. We do mostly ales at Hoodoo. We brew our two main beers that we sell the most of are our Kolsch and our IPA. So those are both ales. The Kolsch is actually called a hybrid beer, so it's an ale yeast, and we ferment it very cool. We ferment it at about 60 degrees to kind of get that crispness that we get with a lager, but we get to do it with an ale yeast, and that's a traditional style from Cologne, Germany, is the Kolsch style. Everything else we make just kind of rotates in and out. We have all sorts of different beers. We kind of see it as a big home brewery. We just kind of say, gosh, it'd be neat to make a Schwartz beer, which is a black lager. It's like, yeah, let's do it. So then we just kind of get the ingredients in here, and we brew away kind of whatever we're feeling like to kind of fill up our menu board. So it's really fun. We do a few lagers a year. We always do our Maibach in the spring. That's kind of our kickoff to summer. It's a malty German lager, light in color. Just a delicious way to kick off. We released that in early May, just kind of get the summer going, and then we do a traditional Oktoberfest lager, and that comes out in late September, right to kick off Oktoberfest. So we start Oktoberfest at Hoodoo on the same day that they do in Germany, and in Germany in Munich, they have the mayor of Munich come and tap the first keg of Oktoberfest at noon on that first Saturday of Oktoberfest, and we do the same thing here. So on that same Saturday at noon, we have the city mayor, and then we're lucky enough to have two mayors up here. So we have the city mayor and the borough mayor, and they come down and they help us tap that first keg, and then the celebration kind of kicks off, and we do all sorts of fun stuff, as much fun as we can have around the brewery for Oktoberfest, and we do fun things around town. And anyways, that's kind of the ales and lagers. There's also, sour beers can be made a number of ways. Brettanomyces beers, that's another kind of a type of domesticated wild yeast. So those are sour beers. We do a sour beer that's a kettle sour, so we sour the wort in the kettle before boiling, using raw grain. That sours the wort, and then we ferment it normally with an ale yeast. But the great thing about craft beer is that it's endless. Every brewery makes beer a little differently or very differently, and there's good quality and there's not so good quality, and there's really an endless number of styles and variation and creativity that you can put into it, which is really one of the reasons we decided to get into it. I just really love seeing all the different beers out there and all the possibility, and that's really why I still love it, is just being able to create new beers and make people happy. So,
is there like a central depository of yeast, or does every brewery kind of find the supplier that they prefer? And I'm sure that you've got to ship yours in from the downstates. Yeah,
there's quite a few yeast companies that their job is to just keep the yeast banks, and they grow the yeast up to make pitchable amounts, amounts that breweries can use in their breweries. So we can order up any of I would say 100 strains. We can order it, and if they have it in stock, then they can ship it out. We have them overnighted in nice temperature controlled boxes, because you can't freeze that. But there's so many strains from all over the world, historic strains, because really these yeast strains that brewers are using have been domesticated and refined over hundreds and hundreds of years to produce these great flavors that we get now with beers. And so in this day and age, it's great. We can just order up. One of my favorite yeast strains is the Weihenstephan strain. That's this old German strain that produces, fantastic Hefeweizen. So this particular yeast strain leaves the beer very cloudy. It doesn't settle to the bottom. So you have this cloudy beer. It gives off isoamyl acetate, which is a banana flavor, and also 4-vinyl guaiacol, which is a clove flavor. So you have this banana clovey flavor that comes from this yeast, and it just makes an incredible Hefeweizen beer. So we can get that, we can just order that and make that when we're ready to make our Hefeweizen for the summer. But we also try and reuse yeast, so we can if we're going to brew the same beer or a beer that uses the same yeast, we can harvest it out of the bottom of the tanks. When you see a fermenter in a brewery, it's got the cone shape at the bottom. So that's to kind of collect the yeast into that cone, and then you can harvest that out of the bottom of the tank, keep it in what we call a yeast brink, which is a sanitary yeast vessel, and we can keep that in the cooler. We keep it for no more than 2 weeks, so we can keep it kind of alive in the back in our cooler, and then we can inject that into the next batch of beer that needs that yeast. And so that's this fresh, delicious yeast culture, and that's really the best way to do it. So we try to do that whenever we can. It can be logistically challenging, especially if you're using multiple yeast. So that's whenever we can do that, we reuse as much as we can. But we also have kind of the world at our fingertips, and all these wonderful yeast strains out there.
So if you're careful with it, the yeast could be kind of like a sourdough or something like that. You just keep it going. As long as you don't let that thing die, you can brew another batch with it and keep on going until it's kind of expended, something like that, you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you have good quality wort that you're feeding it and making good beer and everything's very clean, it's got to be very clean, then you can use it over and over. There's the kind of rule of thumb out there is use it about 10 times because each time you use it, it goes through a reproductive phase where it produces more yeast in the tank. So with that reproduction, you can start to have variation. It'll start, it could start slowly changing the flavors that it produces. So there's a rule of thumb to use it about 10 times. But some breweries pitch fresh yeast every single time, or they'll use it maybe up to 3 times. Some breweries will use it hundreds of times. Old breweries that are in Europe, that's what they've always done. They just use it over and over and over and over and over again. And the yeast, they know that the yeast isn't going to change for the worse. They've kind of domesticated it to that brewery. We use it. We might use it, 5 to 8 times, and then we never have perceived that the flavor's changing. But we kind of get to this point, and the yeast has always been just performing great, and everything seems normal. But I kind of get to this point, and I just say, that's probably good. Let's just start over and just make sure we don't get to that point, get to a point of it changing. It's kind of just an insurance policy. It's worth it. We get a few uses out of it, and then I like to just start anew and just that over the years, I kind of we go a little farther and just kind of assess it. At this point, we're kind of in the maybe 5 to 8 reuses, and then we start over.
And what happens if you go into brewing and your beer comes out and it's fouled up, it doesn't have the flavor that you want? Does that happen a lot? Is that something that you have to account for, or is that a rarity?
It's a rare, hopefully it's a rarity when you get to this point with the commercial setting. It's kind of just case by case. We've only had one batch. It was very early on. It was one of our first batches, and we just weren't happy with it. It was just overly sweet. It was a porter beer, and we just were conflicted because we were like, well, we really would like to put this on tap and sell it. We already had hey, we're tapping our new porter tomorrow. But in the end, when we sat down and we decided not to sell it. We just said, it's probably pretty good, but it's not great. And we kind of said, we're only going to produce great beer, and anything that isn't great, we're not going to sell. And when you get to that moment, though, it's hard to stick to that as a business person, because you put so much money into it until this point that you kind of just want to get it on tap and hopefully it'll just go away. But that's one of those difficult decisions that you have to take the higher road. And when we had that batch, we found out it was a faulty temperature probe in our mash tun in our brew house. The temperature probe was just installed, a few weeks before that, and there was a screw that was a little loose, so the probe was reading incorrectly, and we basically made not a very fermentable wort, so it came out very sweet. So then the beer sat in the tank for a while, and we were kind of getting ready to dump it, although I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And then that was right around when Great Harvest Bread Company opened here in Fairbanks, and they were looking to make a beer cheese bacon bread. So they called us and said, "Yeah, we're wondering if you have any beer that's old or just anything that just bottom of the barrel, anything you can't sell or anything." And it was just this perfect timing. We took them a keg of the beer, and they made some bread with it, and it was just this fantastic bread. It was perfect. And so they ended up over the course of a few months using this entire batch of beer to make bread out of it, and it was just this kind of serendipity, awesome thing that we actually didn't have to dump it down the drain.
Well, it's great not to have to waste it, and that's one of the questions I had about your byproducts. Can any of your byproducts be used to go into animal feed or into? I don't know if they can do. I don't know what you can do with it, but the byproducts, where does that go?
We the main byproduct is called spent grain, so that's the grain that's left in the mash tun or the lauter tun after you drain the liquid off and you rinse as much sugars out of it as you can. So it's all the husk material from the barley. It's cellulose and lots of protein. So we generally are just taking the starches in the brew house and we're converting them into sugars, and then we're taking those sugars, which we're going to turn that sweet liquid into beer. So what's left behind is that cellulose and lots of protein. So it's fantastic animal feed. Really, any brewery in the world is selling or giving away their spent grain to local farmers, because when it comes out of the brew house, it's hot, so it's 150 plus degrees. It's hot and it's soaking wet, and it kind of needs to be taken care of soon. So it needs to be either thrown into the pig feed or chickens. Chickens love it. Cows love it. Great high protein, high fiber feed. But since it's soaking wet, it kind of has to be done immediately. You can't just throw it on a shelf. After about 2 days, if you have a pile of spent grain sitting there, it'll smell really, really bad. And then by about 4 days, it will smell horrible. So we have a call list of farmers, mostly out on Chino Hot Springs Road out here, that we say, okay, we're brewing Wednesday. We'll have about 2,000 pounds of spent grain, and then we have a guy named Brian that takes most of it, but he'll just pull up in his truck. We'll just load him up right when it comes out of the brew house, and then he'll take it out and mix it with some other things and feed it to his livestock out there.
And have you had any ability to tap into the Alaska grown market yet, or using Alaska barley, or is our barley that we're growing up here not really intended? Maybe there's not even enough supply. I don't know how that looks.
Yeah, it's really we get that question a lot, they brew or they grow barley here, why don't you use that? The main things is they grow mainly 6-row barley. So 6-row barley, you can make beer out of that, and that's really the main type of barley that let's say the big breweries, Budweiser, Miller, they use 6-row. It's a little cheaper. You get a little bit more yield per acre when you're growing it, but you don't have the same flavor qualities as 2-row barley, which is mainly what craft brewers use, just because you're relying so much on that great flavor, the highest quality. So mainly what they grow up here is 6-row barley, because it's mainly used for feed, so that's kind of the first barrier in the way. And the next one is that the grain has to be malted. So when they malt grain, they do this in generally massive quantities. There's huge maltsters all over the world. What they do is they soak the grain for a couple of days, and that the barley seed will take up moisture for a couple of days. Then they move the grain into germination rooms. So these huge rooms where there's a big 4-foot deep bed on the floor of this grain, and there's lots of warm air, and it's just a great environment for germination. So the seed will start to think that it's a nice spring day and it just rained, and it's time to turn into a plant. So it'll start to go through these processes of the enzymes traveling through the seed and starting to soften the seed and break down the starches. So after about 5 days in that germination room, a rootlet will come out of the seed, And once that's about an inch long, they'll kiln the grain, so then they dry it out. So then that's malted barley. So that's a shelf-stable product. They bag that up, and then that's good, especially in a nice dry place like Fairbanks. It can just sit on a pallet for a year or two and be ready to brew at any moment. So in Alaska, we don't have any sort of a malting facility. So somebody would have to, build a way to malt, tons and tons of grain at a time to even supply the Alaska market. We're a small brewery, and we go through, 2,000 to 4,000 pounds of grain a week, and and we're pretty small potatoes. Where a brewery like Alaskan or Denali Brewing or Midnight Sun, they're going through hundreds of thousands of pounds a week just between them. So you would need a decent supply of barley and then a way to kind of process and store all that. So we bring about half of our grain in from Germany, from a maltster in Bamberg, Germany called Weyermann. They have the best malt in the world, I think. So we bring that all the way, from the other side of the world, just to get a totally authentic flavor in any of our kind of German European beers. And then the rest of our grain, the other half comes from either Breeze malting in Wisconsin or Great Western malting in Vancouver, Washington. But the idea of making malt up here would be a pretty tough one. The way I can see you doing it is maybe just making the specialty malts, which are kind of the caramelized grains that we use to, add color and depth of flavor and character to beers. There are micro maltsters around the country that are starting to do that. They'll just make these specialty grains that you can kind of augment your beers with. And I could see that working up here. Somebody would need to kind of take on that risk and build a little malt house and maybe do that. And that'd be, we would be all over that if somebody did that. I think a lot of Alaska breweries would love to use any sort of Alaskan products you can. But as we all know, it's pretty tough to do up here.
Yeah, I think that the demand for Alaska grown or Alaska products is huge. The problem is that the supply is so inconsistent or expensive because we lack the economy of scale. So I definitely don't hold it against anybody not taking on the risk. Maybe somebody will hear this and decide to take on the risk. Maybe we will finish the bridge, have agriculture, land sales in Nenana, and get things going. I don't know how that will work out. So one thing, just an observation, maybe this can be my education moment. You were talking about ales and lagers, which I really enjoy the kind of the pricing of that. Generally, you would imagine, I don't know if this works out in the brewing industry, but the way that you described it, a lager would be a more expensive end product to purchase. So an ale would be cheaper and a lager would be more expensive if I'm going in to buy it, generally speaking.
Not necessarily, it takes more time. So it's, business wise, it's a little more expensive on kind of the capital front where you need more tank space. But going into the store and looking at ale versus lager for cost, it doesn't really seem that way. If you're looking at a kind of your typical light lager, Budweiser, or even kind of premium ones like, let's say, Heineken or Stella, those are they're made on such a scale that they're made. Those breweries are massive, and they're I remember I toured the Coors Brewery about a year ago, and they make in about 18 minutes what we make in a year, beer wise. So just the volume that's coming out of those breweries is just incredible. And so they're able to keep those costs down because they just have the volume, so they can sell those beers at a good price. So for a craft brewer, a lager, if we make a lager, it can be a little more expensive. A lot of times you just kind of swallow that because you don't want to price yourself out of selling the beer itself. It's only so elastic. So a lot of times they'll be about the same price, but usually in the kind of craft scene, they might be a little bit more expensive. Just try and recoup a little bit of that added capital cost.
Well, and so where I was going with that one particularly is if you have an ale or a lager, or you have a cheaper wine, a more expensive wine, whiskeys, there is the potential that something that's more expensive is of higher quality, and that's certainly possible. But the higher price is not necessarily reflective of the quality. It really is just capturing the amount of time that the brewer or the distiller had that inventory waiting to be sold. So just because you go in, you might say, "Hey, well, look at this lager. This is the more expensive." People like to put value on that price tag, but really, it's just a reflection of how long something has been sitting in inventory, not being sold. And so, ale, lager, something that's been on the shelf for 20 years or 2 years, I've never really found where people put value into something and say, this is something that's expensive because it's nice, but it's not nice. It's just capturing the amount of time that something was held in inventory for the producer.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, the whole pricing pricing of your kind of finished product that's leaving your business is always just an interesting conundrum of trying to figure out how to price things and what warrants what prices. That's been when we went into this, that's always been a difficult thing. Is like, well, what is it? What do we price things at, and what? So I think if you try and say this spent more time in our tanks and try to recoup that cost, there's one way of doing that of doing a higher price, but you also don't want people to see the price and not buy it, and then therefore you kind of are stuck with this product. So you kind of have to, you just have to weigh the pricing scenarios, and at some point just go for it.
Well, I'll do one last question here. I could listen to somebody talking about brewing beer all day long because it's something I'm not any good at it. I'm interested. I understood some of the words. Unfortunately, I didn't clarify them as we were going. Pitching the yeast, wort. Somebody can just type that in, look it up in the process. We don't need to go through all of that. But how has bringing the recreational marijuana industry into Alaska, do they complement each other as far as the craft brewery goes? Are they completely unrelated? How is that developed in Fairbanks for you?
Yeah, Fairbanks is pretty hotbed as far as there's a lot of growers and a lot of shops up here. There's a lot of acreage too, but I guess there was probably some worry by some brewers that people would start using more cannabis and drinking less beer or something like that. But I never really thought that it would affect anything. And as far as we can tell, it hasn't affected anything detrimentally or anything like that. A lot of the cannabis users are craft beer drinkers too. They kind of go together in a lot of ways, just lifestyle wise. We have a shop about a block from us called Pakalolo, good friends of ours, and they've been just great. They had their Christmas party at the brewery, and they started about a month ago. They started taking some of our spent grain, and they're experimenting with mixing it with their soils. They do these living soils, as opposed to hydroponics. So they're trying different soil blends, and they've been using our spent grain in their soils, which is really really kind of neat. There are a couple shops in Fairbanks looking for kind of the on-site consumption. So basically trying to do the taproom model that breweries do, but be able to do that for cannabis users at their shops. So it's interesting to watch them unfold and try and kind of fight for their rights in this new industry. But yeah, I think it's great. I think people enjoy the freedom of that it's not illegal anymore and it's not so taboo. And as I was growing up into believing, so I think it's great. I think it's been good for our industry as good as it is for just people in general, just to have the freedom to do what they want to do.
It's always great to have a business opportunity for somebody. If somebody's going to go mix their labor, provide something that the public wants, it's great to see them be able to offer that to make a living doing it, and then that recirculates, whatever amount of multiplier that is in the community. It certainly is one. It brings things. I don't know if it necessarily brings things out of the black market. That might be a kind of a false flag type of argument. But what it does is it allows somebody to go out, make a living, provide something that the public wants. But next time,
yeah, absolutely.
Next time that I'm in Fairbanks, I'm recording this out here, Bristol Bay, so my time in Fairbanks is not that frequently. But as I told you, I was doing a job in Flowline. I could look over, I could see Hoodoo Brew. I'll definitely stop by, grab something from you. Hopefully everybody can go to hoodoobrew.com. You can find all of the information there. You have anything coming up really soon?
Well, this is kind of once we get past the Christmas, this is more or less kind of a slower time of year, which we kind of use to do just kind of take a deep breath before we start diving into summer. We have a couple of new beers coming out. We usually have a new beer coming out. Let's say there's no real rhythm to it, but once every couple of weeks or months. So we have a New England IPA coming out pretty quick here, and also we made an ESB for UAF their anniversary a few years ago. So now we've been making that. Usually once a year we'll make that. So we got that coming back out. It's just a delicious beer. But other than that, we're just kind of cruising. So yeah, when you make it up here, definitely stop by and see if I'm around. I'm usually at the brewery, so I'd love to show you around.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Teach you more about beer.
Yeah, no, it's great. Maybe we'll talk again sometime close to one of the solstices. Sometimes. This was
okay.
Bobby with Hoodoo Brewery. Thanks for coming on to Alaska Conversations. Talk to you soon.
Okay, you bet. Thank you.